No driver's death is more of a mystery. A seemingly minor crash took his life. Unknown voices of warning echoing in the minds of other drivers. Was he somehow to blame for his own death? And was it all predicted through visions days in advance? Larry Smith was NASCAR's Rookie of the Year in 1972. When he lost his life at Talladega in 1973, it raised questions for which few had answers. It has long been used as an example for unexplained things that happen at Talladega. A man whose life has been reduced to part of an urban legend, but maybe he carried a secret throughout his career that could explain most of the mystery. Larry Smith was born in June 1940. It appears he may have lied about his age when he started racing because all reference material says he was born in 1942, while his headstone says 1940. As a teen, Larry sold drinks in the stands at Hickory Motor Speedway and watched as Ralph Earnhardt and Ned Jarrett raced. After high school, he spent a few years in the Navy. Then in 1962, he started racing sportsman cars at Hickory. By 1970, Smith made the decision to climb up the NASCAR ladder. He drove the sportsman race at Daytona in 1971, where he ran second until he lost the clutch after 40 laps. He made his Cup debut at the World 600 that year and got his first top 10 at Talladega in August. Before 1972, he took his family savings, about $29,000 that he and his wife intended to put towards a new home, and bought a Ford Torino from Banjo Matthews and 2 engines. A 6th-place finish in the World 600 was his best, as he won the Rookie of the Year title.
Number one turn, a car spinning up against the wall over there, all the way up against the wall and back down the infield.
That's number 92, Larry Smith of Lenoir, North Carolina, who's been running very, very well, who's spun out down in this first and second turn.
Larry, you took sort of a wild ride between that first and second turn. What happened when you went in there?
Just as I go into the turn, the crankshaft turned loose, and she just done all kind of tricks. Went backwards into the wall, and then the front end went into the wall. The drive shaft took out from under the car, and it caught on its end and threw the car up in the air, and it shot it down on the infield.
Larry, you've been running very strong here recently, and particularly here today. You're the top candidate for, or one of the top candidates for the Rookie of the Year, and I know that this is one goal that you'd like to achieve.
Yes, I'm working hard to get it, and I'll be at Talladega again.
But Larry's racing career took a toll on his personal life. At the end of 1972, his 11-year marriage to his wife Patricia ended. "I guess it was largely my fault," Larry said. "I'm not the family type. I was away 3/4 of the time, and it wasn't fair to Pat. She couldn't accept the fact that racing was number 1 and the marriage was number 2. Now we're both free to do what we want." Larry began his career as an independent, trying to build his own cars and race them himself. But his big break came at the 1972 Southern 500. The Canadian-owned Carling Black Label Beer Company was trying to expand their sales into the United States, and auto racing was a major strategy for them. At Darlington, Smith picked up a small sponsorship with Carling that expanded into 1973. He appeared in widely aired TV commercials, and Carling's advertising extended to both IndyCar and Can-Am, with David Hobbs driving.
At Carling Black Label, we figure there's no such thing as having just one beer. That's why we brew Black Label with the kind of taste that starts out great and stays great. So there's always room for another. And isn't that what drinking beer is all about?
Flavor enough for the whole world. Flavor enough for the whole world.
In a February interview, Larry told journalist Steve Wade, quote, "At first I was a bit puzzled as to why they would pick me, even though I was very happy about it all. They said that they were new to racing, like I was, and they wanted a driver they could grow with." Larry made no secret that he wasn't in the same class as the sport's biggest names like Richard Petty and Bobby Allison. He also only raced at the tracks that were over a mile in length, and his team wasn't strong enough to compete for wins. But maybe by 1974 or 75, that team could grow, and then he could contend. Anybody who has followed NASCAR racing for a while knows that there are 2 kinds of drivers, the winners like Petty and Allison, and the other guys who are content just to finish, he said. "I'd quit racing right now if I didn't think I could win in another 1 or 2 more years." The 1973 season started poorly for Smith. 14th in the Daytona 500 was his best moment, while the worst came at Talladega in May. A massive crash on lap 8 blocked the track and took out many cars. Larry's was one of 21 cars eliminated in the wreck. He He quickly got out, however, and rushed to the aid of Wendell Scott, who had suffered a broken leg, broken arm, and broken ribs. It was this wreck that ultimately ended Scott's career.
And Larry, now what was the guy got killed at the same year?
Larry Smith?
Not Larry. Yeah, Larry Smith.
Yeah.
He was driving for a guy, a green one.
Yeah.
A mechanic. Well, he came to me, he thought I was dead. But I didn't know I ever got knocked out.
Larry's career took a major step forward in June when he joined forces with John Green, a highly respected mechanic from Spartanburg, South Carolina. At the time, Larry said, quote, "The operation has become too big for me alone. My sponsor agreed that I should concentrate on racing and get away from this one-man operation." Green was able to quickly increase the horsepower of the car and set it up well. With it, Larry finished 10th at Atlanta in July and entered the August Talladega 500 optimistic. In a press release, Larry said, quote, "Green got a reading of more than 500 horsepower, and it looks like we got a cure for what has been ailing us. We are finally reaching a point where we can run with the others. John has really made the stock car work. I believe we've turned things around for 1973. I have a score to settle here at Talladega. Things happen to me here that don't happen anywhere else. I got sucked into that multi-car wreck here in May, and I sure want to make up for that." After his divorce, Larry began dating Lillian Vandiver, the younger sister of fellow driver Jim Vandiver. A few days before the Talladega race, she awoke in fear in the middle of the night after having a vivid dream that either her brother or Larry would die at Talladega that weekend. She had the same dream again the next night. At the track, one day before the race, Jim Vandiver's 11-year-old son was stung by bees, and Lillian brought her nephew to the infield hospital. When she saw the table where they treat injured drivers, she sensed that someone she loved would be laying there the next day. After driver introductions, Lillian saw Larry and said goodbye as he told her, quote, "I'll see you after the race." In that moment, she knew she would never see him again.
This is the Talladega 500 from Alabama International Motor Speedway.
At a standing ovation as these 50 late model stock cars move out here for this $150,000 contest today. The 35th position today will be Larry Smith of Lenoir, North Carolina in a Mercury. The field moves down, ladies and gentlemen. The 5th annual Talladega 500. They're down for a start.
After completing 13 laps, Larry Smith hit the turn 1 wall.
Here's a problem over on number 2. Looks like Larry Smith from here hit the wall on that outside retaining wall, and he's coasting to a stop as he drifts down toward the safety apron. From here it appears to be Larry Smith hit the wall on the outside. We'll have to wait and see how severe the damage is, but from here it appears he would be out of the race.
And by the time he had brought the car down and put the binders on to bring it to a total halt, the safety crew was waiting on Larry Smith in the Carling Black Label car.
When a track worker reached the scene, he radioed back to race control. "It's bad, real bad. We need help and an ambulance." While the race wasn't televised, there were references in newspapers to watching a replay of the crash, which said he went into the turn at full speed, hit the wall with the right front of the car, and slowly slid to the apron. Exactly what happened to cause this has been disputed. Cale Yarborough thought Smith's crash was due to an engine failure, saying, quote, "It looked to me like Larry's engine blew and his wheels got into the oil. I thought it was bad because he really slammed that wall." But most people blamed either a mechanical failure or a blown tire. NASCAR officials said they thought Smith cut a tire 2 laps earlier and spent those 2 laps driving on the inner liner before that finally blew out. Journalist Benny Phillips, however, thought that was a lie pushed by a tire company representative to cover for a blown tire. Smith was taken from the car and loaded onto a stretcher. For several laps, track workers attended to him on the apron, in full view of the other drivers and spectators.
Caution was on the speedway for the crash of Larry Smith of Lenoir, North Carolina, his car crashing in turn number 1, and the report is that he may have been injured in that crash. Safety crews there, that is the preliminary report. We'll have more for you on that shortly.
Just towing Larry Smith's automobile into the garage area, and it really took quite a lick down in that corner. The right front wheel completely sheared off the automobile, and the front end looks like they stuck it into a meat grinder. The windshield smashed out of the car as they're towing it into the garage area now.
we were quite concerned because Larry remained in that car for a good while after the safety crews reached him. He was taken on a track ambulance, carried out of the car on a stretcher, taken by ambulance to the track hospital, and now we're awaiting further word. But he really hit the wall, and his car was really heavily damaged.
He was taken to the infield hospital and pronounced dead from what the track doctor declared to be a massive basal skull fracture. Newspapers wrote of the crying girlfriend with long dark hair who knew it would happen, saying, quote, "I knew this was going to happen. I knew it. I had a dream, more than one dream this week."
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great sadness and regret that we must announce at this time the Alabama International Speedway has had its first fatality. Larry Smith of Lenore, North Carolina, was killed today in the first turn crash in the early going of this event. It just didn't seem to be that hard a crash. We've seen so many cars crash many times harder, but something broke. No one gave it a thought but that he would walk away from that crash. Grand National Rookie of the Year last year, a very personable guy who spoke so well for this sport and loved it so dearly.
Accident did not look bad at all, Ken. No one even gave it second thoughts. I mean, it just a normal bounce off the wall. So
looked like he grazed it, and looked like he grazed the wall and had come in, and that was not the case.
Later in the race, Bobby Isaac pulled into the pits and got out of the car, saying that something told him to stop. The story quickly said that he heard a voice. A driver dead in the infield, while voices told another driver to quit. The stories would forever be linked to create the idea that Talladega was cursed. In reality, Isaac denied hearing a voice, but he and Smith had known each other from Hickory and were friends. Isaac had asked for an update several times over the radio when he saw Larry on the stretcher. While he never admitted it, car owner Bud Moore believed the sight of Smith laying on the stretcher took away Isaac's will to race. The biggest part of the Larry Smith story is the idea that the crash wasn't bad and that there was no reason he should have lost his life. Crew Chief John Green was quoted as saying, "The damage to the car was basically sheet metal. I saw the wreck. It didn't look that bad. I kept waiting for him to come around. I thought we still had a chance for him to stay in the race. But looking at a photo of the damage, it tells a very different story. Smith's Mercury suffered major damage and was unlikely to return. But cars of that era were strong, and unless there was an impact to the driver's side, a driver was expected to be okay. So if everyone agreed he should have survived, then what happened? The only damage inside of the car was a broken headrest, which indicated movement. But 2 years later, an article mentioned Smith was using a special seatbelt that unhooked in the crash, and it was said that type of harness was later banned by NASCAR. At the time, some drivers would use a shoulder harness with an inertia reel, like a passenger car. It would extend and retract, but could be locked into place. In a 2013 book by Greg Moore, son of Bud Moore, he explained that, quote, "The inertia reel stripped at the back of his shoulder harness. They used to have a lever where the driver could release the pressure on his shoulder harness to move around some, then lock it back in place. Well, the impact stripped the teeth out of that inertia reel that locked the belts in place. Practically unrestrained in the crash, Smith impacted something in the cockpit." And just like the 1975 article says, the NASCAR rulebook from that year bans shoulder harness inertia reels. The longest-lasting rumor surrounding the Larry Smith tragedy is that he was responsible for his own death because he removed his helmet padding, saying it irritated his head, or he didn't want to mess up his hair. Either way, it implies he was driving using only a fiberglass shell and no padding. At the time, track doctor James Hardwick said, quote, "Larry's helmet did not break, and it was the best made, just too many G-forces." NASCAR investigated the helmet itself, with an official first saying, quote, "We can't yet determine if the head injuries were a result of the helmet slipping forward or the head being bounced around inside the helmet. It led to the research of new helmet designs and a fresh look at safety. We are looking at other ways of mounting the helmet, either in the car or on the driver, to ensure the best possible protection. One new helmet design was described as being longer in the back and had straps that went under a driver's arms to prevent the helmet from moving forward. The design was relatively similar to the Hans device, which came 25 years later. In 2001, NASCAR Vice President Bill Gazaway reflected on this, saying, quote, "It never did work out. It needed a lot of improvement." But in September 1977, Dr. Hardwick was quoted as saying, "Larry shouldn't have died. He had cut all the lining out of his helmet. I think he was just trying to get some air in there. He had a tremendous head of hair. It seemed unthinkable a driver would actually remove helmet lining, especially a driver like Larry Smith. On many times he spoke of how careful he was to not jeopardize his racing, how he drove carefully on the highway, and even gave up drinking, despite being sponsored by a beer company. But Larry had a secret he carried with him to his death. In a panel discussion at the International Motorsports Press Association in September 1973, Richard Petty gave more information that a pre-existing condition was the true cause of his death. What nobody knows about Larry Smith, he said, is that he spent a total of 2 years in the hospital since he was first able to drive a car. This must have been 12 or 15 wrecks. He'd had 3 fractured skulls. He wasn't physically strong enough to be able to hit the wall at that kind of speed. Maybe that was the true problem. Larry was interviewed for a book by Jerry Bledsoe, simply called The World's #1 Flat-Out All-Time Great Stock Car Racing Book. It spoke of how Larry was hit by a car at age 8 and suffered 2 broken legs and a broken skull. Then in 1963, after a day of drinking on the lake, he was towing home a boat when he fell asleep at high speed and crashed into a creek bank. Once again, his skull was broken. He even had a metal plate in his head. Greg Moore believed the padding removal was not because he wanted to protect his hair, but instead to deal with the headaches he had with the helmet compressing the plate in his skull. While this crash has long been a source of mystery, like all crashes, it has an explanation, or perhaps many. A broken seatbelt, a driver whose helmet and body couldn't survive the unexpected impact. Most would likely say he shouldn't have been on the track, but Larry Smith was a man who loved racing, and he took a risk to do it.